Volume 1, Book 4, Chapters 1 through 15 of The Life of Apollonius of Tyana. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Apollonius of Tyana by Flavius Philostratus. Translated by F.C. Conybeare. Volume 1, Book 4. Chapter 1. And when they saw our sage in Ionia, and he had arrived in Ephesus, even the mechanics would not remain at their handicrafts, but followed him, one admiring his wisdom, another his beauty, another his way of life, another his bearing, some of them everything alike about him. Reports also were current about him, which originated from various oracles. Thus, from the oracle at Colophon it was announced that he shared its peculiar wisdom, and was absolutely wise, and so forth. From that of Didyma similar rumors emanated, as also from the shrine of Pergamon. For the god urged not a few of these who were in need of health to betake themselves to Apollonius, for this was what he himself approved, and was pleasing to the fates. Deputations also waited upon him from various cities, offering him their hospitality, and asking his advice about life in general, as well as about the dedication of altars and images. And he relegated their several affairs, in some case by letter, but in others he said would visit them. And the city of Smyrna also sent a deputation, but they would not say what they wanted, though they besought him to visit them. So he asked a legate what they wanted of him, but he merely said, "To see him and to be seen." So Apollonius said, "I will come, but, O ye Muses, grant that we may also like one another." Chapter 2. The first discourse then which he delivered was to the Ephesians from the platform of their temple, and its tone was not that of the Socratic school, for he dissuaded and discouraged them from other pursuits, and urged them to devote themselves to philosophy alone, and to fill Ephesus with real study rather than with idleness and arrogance such as he found around him there. For they were devoted to dancers, and taken up with pantomimes, and the whole city was full of pipers, and full of effeminate rascals, and full of noise. So, though the Ephesians had come over to him, he determined not to wink at such things, but cleared them out, and made them odious to most of them. Chapter 3. His other discourses he delivered under the trees which grow hard by the cloisters, and in these he sometimes dealt with the question of communism, and taught that they ought to support and be supported by one another. While he was doing so, on one occasion, sparrows were sitting quite silent upon the trees, but one of them suddenly gave a chirp as it flew up, just as if he had some instruction to give to his fellows, and the latter, on hearing it, themselves set up a chirping, and rose and flew off under the guidance of the one. Now Apollonius went on with his argument, for he knew what it was that made the sparrows take wing, but he did not explain the matter to the multitudes who were listening to him. But when they all looked at the birds, and some of them in their silliness thought it a miraculous occurrence, Apollonius interrupted this argument and said, "A boy has slipped who was carrying some barley in a bowl, and after carelessly gathering together what was fallen, he has gone off, leaving much of it scattered about in yonder alley. And this sparrow, witnessing the occurrence, has come here to acquaint his fellows with the good luck, and to invite them to come and eat with him." Most of his audience accordingly ran off to the spot, but Apollonius continued to those who remained with him the discourse he had proposed to himself on the topic of communism. And when they returned talking loudly and full of wonder, he continued thus: "You see how the sparrows care for one another, and delight in communism, but we are far from approving of it. Nay, should we happen to see anyone sharing his own in common with others, we set him down as a spendthrift, and talk about his extravagance, and so forth. While as for those who are supported by him, we call them parasites and flatterers. What then is left for us to do, except to shut ourselves up like birds that are being fed up and fattened, and gorge ourselves in the dark until we literally burst with fat? Chapter 4. A pestilence was creeping over Ephesus, but the disease had not yet reached its full violence before Apollonius understood that it was approaching, and impressed with the danger, he foretold it, and interspersed his discourses with such exclamations as, "O earth, remain true to thyself!" And he added a tone of menace such appeals as these: "Do thou preserve these men here," and "Thou shalt not pass hither." But his hearers did not attend to these warnings, and thought them mere rhodomontade, all the more because they saw him constantly visiting all the temples in order to avert and depreciate the calamity. And since they conducted themselves so foolishly in respect of the scourge, he thought that it was not necessary to do anything more for them, but began a tour of the rest of Ionia, relegating their several affairs, and from time to time recommending in his discourses what was salutary for his audiences. Chapter 5. But when he came to Smyrna, the Ionians went out to meet him, for they were just celebrating the Pan-Ionian sacrifices. And he there read a decree of the Ionians, in which they besought him to take part in their solemn meeting. And in it he met with a name which had not at all an Ionian ring, for a certain Lucullus had signed the resolution. He accordingly sent a letter to their council, expressing his astonishment at such an instance of barbarism, for he had, it seems, also found the name Fabricius, and other such names in the decrees. The letter on this subject shows how sternly he reprimanded them. Chapter 6. And on another day he presented himself before the meeting of the Ionians, and asked, "What is this cup?" And they answered, "It is the Pan-Ionian cup." Whereupon he took a draught from it, and poured a libation, saying, "O ye gods, who are patrons of the Ionians, may ye grant to this fair colony to enjoy safety at sea, that no disaster may wreak itself on them by land therefrom, and that Aeogeon, the author of earthquakes, may never shake down their cities." These words he uttered under divine impulse, because he foresaw, as I believe, the disasters which afterwards betook Smyrna and Miletus and Chios and Samos, and several of the Iades. Chapter 7. And remarking the zeal with which the people of Smyrna devoted themselves to all sorts of compositions, he encouraged them, and increased their zeal, and urged them to take pride rather in themselves than in the beauty of their city. For although they had the most beautiful of cities under the sun, and although they had a friendly sea at their doors which held the springs of the Zephyr, nevertheless it was more pleasing for the city to be crowned with men than with porticos and pictures, or even with gold in excess of what they needed. For, he said, public edifices remain where they are, and are nowhere seen except in that particular part of the earth where they exist. But good men are conspicuous everywhere, and everywhere talked about, and so they can magnify the city more to which they belong, in proportion to the numbers in which they are able to visit any part of the earth. And he said that cities which are beautiful in the same way as Smyrna was, resemble the statue of Zeus, wrought in Olympia by Phidias, for there Zeus sits, just as it pleased the artist that he should, whereas men who visit all regions of the earth may be well compared with the Homeric Zeus, who is represented by Homer under many shapes, and is a more wonderful creation than the image made of ivory, for the latter is only to be seen upon earth, but the former is an ideal presence imagined everywhere in heaven. Chapter 8. And in these discussions, moreover, with the people of Smyrna, he wisely taught them also how best to guarantee the security of those who live in the cities, for he saw that they were at issue with one another and did not agree with their ideals. He accordingly told them that for a city to be rightly conducted by its inhabitants, you need a mixture of concord with party spirit, and as this utterance seemed inadmissible and hardly logical, Apollonius, realizing that most of them did not follow his argument, added, "White and black can never be one and the same, nor can bitter be wholesomely blended with sweet, but concord can be blended with party spirit to secure the safety of the cities. And let us not consider any meaning to be somewhat as follows: Far be from your city the factiousness which leads men to draw swords and to stone one another. For in a city we need our children to be brought up properly, and we need laws, and we need inhabitants equally versed in discussion and in deeds. But mutual rivalry between men in behalf of the common weal, and with the object that one should give better advice than another, and that one should discharge better than another the duties of magistrate, and that one should discharge the office of an ambassador or of an aedile more brilliantly than his fellows, here, he said, I think you have worthy rivalry and a real contention among yourselves in behalf of the common weal. But that one person should practice one thing, and another another, with a view to benefiting the city, seemed of old a foolish thing to the Lacedaemonians, because they only cultivated the arts of war, and because they all strengthened themselves for this end, and interested themselves in nothing else. But to me it seems best that each man should do what he understands best and what he best can do, for that city will recline in peace, nay, will rather stand up erect, where one man is admired for his popular influence, and another for his wisdom, and another for his liberal expenditure on public objects, and another for his kindliness, and another for his severity and unbending sternness towards malefactors, and another because his hands are pure beyond suspicion. Chapter 9. And as he was thus discoursing, he saw a ship with 3 sails leaving the harbour, of which the sailors were each discharging their particular duties in working it out to sea. Accordingly, by way of reforming his audience, he said, Now look at that ship's crew, how some of them, being rowers, have embarked in the tugboats, while others are winding up and making fast the anchors, and others again are spreading the sails to the wind, and others are keeping an outlook at bow and stern. Now if a single member of this community abandoned any one of his particular tasks, or went about his naval duties in an inexperienced manner, they would have a bad voyage, and would themselves impersonate the storm. But if they vie with one another, and are rivals only with the object of one showing himself as good a man as the other, then the ship will make the best havens, and all their voyage be one of fair weather and fair sailing, and the precaution they exercise about themselves will prove to be as valuable as if Poseidon, our Lord of safety, were watching over them. Chapter 10. With such harangues as these, he knit together the people of Smyrna. But when the plague began to rage in Ephesus, and no remedy sufficed to check it, they sent a deputation to Apollonius, asking him to become physician of their infirmity. And he thought that he ought not to postpone his journey, but said, Let us go. And forthwith he was in Ephesus, performing the same feat, I believe, as Pythagoras, who was in Thurii and Metapontum at one and the same moment. He therefore called together the Ephesians, and said, Take courage, for I will today put a stop to the course of the disease. And with these words he led the population entire to the theatre, where the image of the averting god had been set up. And there he saw what seemed an old mendicant artfully blinking his eyes as if blind, and he carried a wallet and a crust of bread in it, and he was clad in rags, and was very squalid of countenance. Apollonius therefore ranged the Ephesians around him, and said, "Pick up as many stones as you can, and hurl them at this enemy of the gods." Now the Ephesians wondered what he meant, and were shocked at the idea of murdering a stranger so manifestly miserable, for he was begging and praying them to take mercy upon him. Nevertheless, Apollonius insisted and egged on the Ephesians to launch themselves on him, and not to let him go. And as soon as some of them began to take shots and hit him with their stones, the beggar, who had seemed to blink and be blind, gave them all a sudden glance, and his eyes were full of fire. Then the Ephesians recognized that he was a demon, and they stoned him so thoroughly that their stones were heaped into a great cairn around him. After a little pause, Apollonius bade them remove the stones, and acquaint themselves with the wild animal they had slain. When therefore they had exposed the object which they thought they had thrown their missiles at, they found that he had disappeared, and instead of him there was a hound who resembled in form and look a Molossian dog, but was in size the equal of the largest lion. There he lay before their eyes, pounded to a pulp by their stones, and vomiting foam as mad dogs do. Accordingly, the statue of the averting god, namely Hercules, has been set up over the spot where the ghost was slain. Chapter 11. Having purged the Ephesians of the plague, and having had enough of the people of Ionia, he started for Hellas. Having made his way then to Pergamon, and being pleased with the temple of Asclepius, he gave hints to the supplicants of the gods what to do in order to obtain favorable dreams. And having healed many of them, he came to the land of Ilium. And as his mind was stored with all the traditions of their past, he went to visit the tombs of the Achaeans, and he delivered himself of many speeches over them, and he offered many sacrifice of a bloodless and pure kind. And then he bade his companions go on board ship, for he himself, he said, must spend a night on the mound of Achilles. Now his companions tried to deter him, for in fact the sons of Dioscorus and the Phidemi and a whole company of such already followed in the train of Apollonius, alleging that Achilles was still dreadful to look upon, for such was the conviction about him of the inhabitants of Ilium. Nevertheless, said Apollonius, I know Achilles well, and that he thoroughly delights in company, for he heartily welcomed Nestor when he came from Pylos, because he always had something useful to tell him, and he used to honor Phoenix with the title of foster father and companion and so forth, because Phoenix entertained him with his talk, and he looked most mildly upon Priam also, although he was his bitterest enemy, so soon as he heard him talk. And when in the course of a quarrel he had an interview with Odysseus, he made himself so gracious that Odysseus thought him more handsome than terrible. For I think that his shield and his plumes that wave so terribly, as they say, are a menace to the Trojans, because he can never forget what he suffered at their hands, when he played him false over the marriage. But I have nothing in common with Ilium, and I shall talk to him more pleasantly than his former companions. And if he slays me, as you say he will, why then I shall repose with Memnon and Cycnus, and perhaps Troy will bury me in a hollow sepulchre, as they did Hector. Such were the words to his companions, half playful and half serious, as he went up alone to the Baro. But they went on board ship, for it was already evening. Chapter 12. But Apollonius came about dawn to them, and said, Where is Antisthenes of Paros? And this person had joined their society 7 days before in Ilium. And when Antisthenes answered that he was there, he said, Have you, O young man, any Trojan blood in your veins?" "Certainly I have," he said, "for I am a Trojan by ancestry." "And a descendant of Priam as well?" asked Apollonius. "Why, yes, by Zeus," answered the other, "and that is why I consider myself a good man, and of good stock." "That explains, then," said the sage, "why Achilles forbids me to associate with you. For after he bade me go as his deputy to the Thessalians in the matter of a complaint which he has against them, and I asked him whether there was anything else which I could do to please him. 'Yes,' he said, 'you must take care not to initiate the young man from Paros in your wisdom, for he is too much of a descendant of Priam, and the praise of Hector is never out of his mouth.'" Chapter 13. Accordingly Antisthenes went off, though against his will. And when the day broke, and the wind off shore increased in strength, and the ship was ready to be launched, it was invaded, in spite of its small dimensions, by a number of other people who were anxious to share the voyage with Apollonius, for it was already autumn, and the sea was not much to be trusted. They all then regarded Apollonius as one who was master of the tempest and of fire, and of perils of all sorts, and so wished to go on board with him, and begged him to allow them to share the voyage with him. But as the company was many times too great for the ship, spying a larger ship, for there were many in the neighbourhood of the tomb of Ajax, he said, "Let us go on board this, for it is a good thing to get home safely with as many as may be." He accordingly doubled the promontory of Troy, and then commanded the pilot to shape his course towards the country of the Iolians, which lies over against Lesbos, and then to turn as close as he could to Methymna, and there to cast anchor. For there it was, he said, that Achilles declared Palamedes lay, where also they would find his image a cubit high, representing, however, a man older than was ever Palamedes. And at the moment of disembarking from the ship, he said, "Let us show our respect, O ye Greeks, for so good a man to whom we owe all wisdom. For we shall anyhow prove ourselves better men than the Achaeans, if we pay tribute to the excellence of one whom they so unjustly slew." They accordingly leapt out of the ship, but he hit upon the tomb and found the statue buried beside it. And there were inscribed on the base of the statue the words, "To the divine Palamedes." He accordingly set it up again in its place, as I myself saw. And he raised a shrine around it, of the size which the worshippers of the goddess of the crossways, called Enodia, use, for it was large enough for 10 persons at once to sit and drink and keep good cheer in. And having done so, he offered up the following prayer: "O Palamedes, do thou forget the wrath wherewith thou wast wrought against the Achaeans, and grant that men may multiply in numbers and wisdom. Yea, O Palamedes, author of all eloquence, author of the Muses, author of myself." Chapter 14. He also visited in passing the shrine of Orpheus when he had put in at Lesbos. And they tell that it was here that Orpheus once on a time loved to prophesy, before Apollo had turned his attention to him. For when the latter found that men no longer flocked to Gryneum for the sake of oracles, nor to Clarus, nor to Delphi, where is the tripod of Apollo, and that Orpheus was the only true oracle, his head having lately come from Thrace, he presented himself before the giver of oracles, and said, "Cease to meddle with my affairs, for I have already put up long enough with your vaticinations." Chapter 15. After this they continued their voyage along the Sea of Euboea, which Homer considered to be one of the most dangerous and difficult to traverse. However, the sea was smooth, and was much better than you expected in that season, and their conversation turned upon the many and famous islands which they were visiting, and upon shipbuilding and pilotage and other topics suitable to a voyage. But as Damis found fault with some of the things they said, and cut short many of their remarks, and would not allow some of their questions to be put, Apollonius realized that he was anxious to discuss some other topic, and said, "What ails you, Damis, that you break in on the course of our questions in this way? For I am sure that it is not because you are seasick or in any way inconvenienced by the voyage that you object to our conversation, for you see how smoothly our ship is wafted over her bosom by the submissive sea. Why then are you so uneasy?" "Because," replied the other, "when a great topic suggests itself, which we surely ought rather to be asking about, we are asking questions about these threadbare and antiquated subjects." "And what," said Apollonius, "may be this topic which makes you regard all others as superfluous?" "You have," he answered, "had an interview with Achilles, O Apollonius, and probably you have heard him speak at length of many things so far unknown to ourselves, and yet you tell us nothing about these, nor do you describe to us the figure of Achilles, but you fill your conversation with talk of the islands we are sailing round and of shipbuilding. If you will not accuse me of bragging," said Apollonius, "you shall hear everything." End of Volume 1, Book 4, Chapters 1 through 15.